introducers. You'll see there's one inside of here. If I can get it out. It's got different size holes in it, depending on, you just, whatever way you turn it, you know, to give them, to restrict the opening on the hive. Almost everybody uses some sort of rock or a brick or something to weigh down the top. This is called a telescoping cover. It's a two-part cover. There's also this is a migratory cover. This is the cover for a nuke. It's a different size. But basically, it just sits on top like this. And it's got a ventilation slot right there. And they don't come with the screen on them. I just put that on there because there's times when you don't want bees to be able to get through there. Same thing for this one. Normally it's just an open slot right there. And that's for ventilation. If you put this cover on there, you want to have the cover's a little bit, the outer cover is a little bit bigger than the inner cover is. There's a gap on the back. You want to keep that gap on whatever side the notch is on. Here's the frames. These are old. You can see that's wax moth damage there. Looks like spider webs. If it was hive beetle larvae, it would be all slimy. They call that a slime out because they'll turn the whole hive into a bunch of slime. And then this would be your brood boxes, 1 or 2, whatever. It's pretty customizable. A lot of people just have one single brood box, but I think the norm in the US is probably to have 2 brood boxes, or maybe 3. If you're using mediums for brood boxes, you might have 3. And then a super would be anything that's stacked above your brood chamber. It could be any size, but anything going on top would be your honey super. Whether you're using deeps or mediums, doesn't matter, they would still be supers. Because you wouldn't have the queen raising brood in there. Geneva didn't cover this in the class. I like them. They're optional, completely optional. Of course, it's also stuck together. This is a slatted wrap. The idea is it gives bees more space inside the hive, so there's not as many bees hanging out on the front of the hive. That's the whole reason for doing it. It's completely optional though. You can not have them and you'll just have a lot more bearding on the front of it. Because the bees, if they don't have a lot of space inside the hive, they'll move out in front of the hive. It makes more room for ventilation. When it's hot in the summer, they're trying to maximize the airflow through the hive, and so most of the bees will go hang out in the front. It's called a beard just because that's what it looks like. It looks like 20,000 bees in a beard on the front of your hive. That's the bottom board. And this hive's set up backwards. Normally, if you had a solid bottom board, you would turn it to where the opening faces downhill. Y'all can see where when it rained the other day, you got water inside of there. So you want the opening facing downhill so the water runs out. I just put it facing the wrong way just to make it easier for everybody to see it. And then this last piece is a landing board. It's completely optional too. You don't need them. I use them because usually they're made out of cypress, which doesn't rot as easy. These things will rot out pretty fast if you put them right on the ground. And I like to use cinder blocks for a hive stand. They're pretty easy to set up, and they raise it a little higher because all this stuff is heavy when it's full of bees and honey. These boxes will weigh 30 or 40 pounds a piece. A 10 frame box might be 50 or 60 pounds. So if you get it up a little bit, it makes it a lot easier to pick it up than it is to try and pick it up off the ground. Especially when the bees have got everything glued together. Hive tool. Here's another kind of hive tool. I use both of them because this one's really good for prying the frames out. If you sit in something like that, you can use the J hook and just reach in there and pop the frame right up. Because again, when it's full of bees, all this stuff is going to be glued in. It doesn't just come out like it does now where I can just reach in and grab it. When you reach in and grab it, you're lifting the whole box all together because it's all glued in. This one is really good. Too many pieces. This one's really good for getting the hive sections apart. You can stick it in the notch and pop it loose because these things will be glued together too. And so you can stick it in the notch and use it as a pry bar and it'll crack it loose. And then I've modified these boxes. You can do this or not, it's totally up to you. But I took a sander, sanded down the corner just a little bit, because when this whole thing is glued together and you go to jab that hive tool in there, you tear up the corners on the boxes, and that'll be the first thing that rots out because you've made notches in it. It'll feather that corner a little bit, feather the wood on it, and so it'll hold moisture in there. And then after a year or two, the whole corner will be rotted out right here, and you wind up having to buy new hives because your corners are all rotted out. If you take a sander and just kind of bevel the corner off just a little bit, it gives you a good place to be able to stick that hive tool in there. See, I don't have to force it. I can just get it in there half an inch or so, and it gives me a place to get a grip on it. But that's just if you want to or not. Doesn't.
It's a really good idea.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but they won't come that way. You'll have to modify them. And of course, you can get them that are completely unassembled, unpainted. If you really want to save money and do a lot of the stuff yourself, get one that you put together yourself. But of course, you'll have to do all the putting together on it. But it's just glue and nails. So you can save probably, I would guess $20 or $30 per hive section, because I'm guessing they're probably around $300 or so now. I haven't priced one lately, but it's probably about $300 per section, something like that.
Yeah, we haven't had to buy them for a minute because we just have so many hive boxes that have been donated.
Oh, nice.
So we're like, we don't know the price that will.
But if you can save, 15 or 20% by putting it together yourself, that's up to you. If you're just getting 2 hives, you might want to just go ahead and get everything all assembled and painted ahead of time. Most people probably would, but it just all depends on, if you have all of the hammers and nails and stuff, and you like doing that kind of work, then you would do it yourself.
Well, you can watch for sales at Southern States, or what's that place up in Hillsboro?
Yeah. That's where I don't. Southern States sells the bee packages where you get everything in one package.
Right.
I don't really like the idea of that because they're selling you like a bee suit and everything all in one package. If you're buying 2 hives, you don't need 2 bee suits and all that stuff too. So
right.
I would rather go to Bailey's and do it. You can also get these things assembled or disassembled. If I was just getting 2 hives and that was all I was ever going to get, I would probably go ahead and get them completely assembled. but you don't have to. You can get them in pieces and put them all together yourself. They're fairly easy to put together. I'm not going to go over how to. Does anybody here plan on building their own hives or anything? I'm not going to go into all of that then. But this is what this was originally, probably wax foundation. Let's see if I can find it. You can also get them with plastic foundation if I can find one. Yeah, here's one. You can see the difference between them. The bees don't eat holes through these. They tend to rearrange the wax. If they want wax somewhere else, they're liable to eat up the wax on one frame so they can move it to a different frame.
So if you had to pick, do you think plastic frames or wooden frames
I
are
like
better?
plastic a lot better. I'll usually take, and it comes coated with wax. I like to do an extra coating on mine because the more wax it has on it, the more likely the bees are to use it. Sometimes they'll just ignore plastic foundation when they wouldn't ignore wax foundation. But wax foundation has problems because it doesn't store very well. If you don't use all the frames in your hive when you first put them together, the wax tends to sag and bow in the hot summer because there's no comb built on it, so there's nothing to give it strength. It's got, you can see that there's wires that run through it in both directions, and they help a little bit. But when it's up close to 100 degrees, that wax will start. It'll get really soft, and it'll start to ripple and bow. And then if you try and use it later, all your foundation is going to have the same ripples in it. The bees won't build it straight because the foundation wasn't straight. That's the main reason I like the plastic better. It'll keep it nice and pretty looking, because if your foundation's not straight and you put two hives together, if there's not enough space between the two of them, the bees tend to join them together all into one big frame. And then that makes it that much more aggravating to get it apart when you're trying to look at the hive. So you really want your foundation nice and straight. You want to keep the bee space nice and even between them, because the bees get really artistic with situations where, you know, if you give them the opportunity to do whatever they want with it, you might not like the results.
So you talked about putting wax on the plastic frames. How do you do that?
I usually just melt it and use a paintbrush and smear it on. But you can also, when you buy it, like at Bailey's or something, it's going to be a big block, probably a 10-pound block of wax. Some people just take it and take chunks of it and just rub it across, because the plastic foundation, you can see it on here, it's not flat. It's got a honeycomb pattern to it. So you could take a piece of wax and just rub it across there, and it'll smear flakes of hard wax right there inside those little cells. And then the bees will just, you know, rearrange it and do whatever they want to with it.
Also, if you are gonna buy wax, make sure you're getting it from somewhere like Bailey's, or like just don't go off of Amazon, because a lot of those, it's not real bee wax, or like they have a lot of chemicals added to it. So you have to be.
Is pretty good.
Yeah, just be careful.
You can tell it's usually commercial beekeepers.
Yeah.
They're selling a lot of wax.
Yeah.
And they'll sell you, but they want to give you a deal on like 30 or 40 pounds of wax at a time. If you're not making candles with it, you probably don't need that much wax. I like making candles, so I buy a lot of wax off of eBay, because I don't make near as much wax as what it takes to make even one candle. So,
right.
Because it takes a lot. Let's see. We saw the solid bottom board. This is the screen bottom board. Of course, you can see the difference right off. Originally, when these were first developed, the idea was that varroa mites would fall off the bees and they would fall right out of the hive. That was the whole reason for these screen bottom boards. The research has shown that it doesn't really, having a screen bottom board doesn't affect your mite load hardly at all. So they're kind of not effective at what they were intended for. A lot of people still use them because they think it gives the hive more ventilation. I don't know if that's true or not. My suspicion is that the ventilation is controlled by the notch in the top of the hive. So putting a screen on the bottom doesn't really affect the airflow going through this notch in the top. I have a feeling it's still restricted, but that's just my suspicion. I don't have any kind of research to back that up with. This piece here is for a piece of corrugated plastic that would come with the bottom board. You slide that in there. I only ever put them in when I'm doing a treatment on the hive. Most of the treatments, the instructions will say that you close off your screen bottom boards. You would just slide that piece of corrugated plastic in here, and it sort of closes the bottom. It's not really like airtight or anything, but it does. But I'm in the process of switching over to solid bottom boards because I don't think the screen bottom boards make that big a difference. And the differences I see are more detrimental than helpful. I think this time of year when it's still cool at night, the queens won't use most of the bottom frames to lay brood in, and I think it's because it's so much chillier down. It's harder. They keep the brood at a constant 95 degrees. That's hard to do when it's 40 degrees outside and there's nothing but a screen in the bottom of the hive. So the further they get down into the closer to the bottom they get, the harder it is for them to keep that brood warm. That's why I'm in the process of switching to solid bottom boards, because I want them to be able to use more of the hive for laying brood. I don't know if it's going to make a difference or not, but I'm hoping.
So in terms of like providing food or supplementing like food, I know for the hives that we have on top of the Global FedEx building, we have like troughs that we pour sugar water into. Is there other types of ways you could add that to your hive?
This is a frame feeder. This is one of the monster ones. They come in, there's another size. This holds about 2 gallons of syrup. They make another size that's about half this wide. That would be the size of a single frame. This is the size of 2 frames. A lot of people use these. They go inside the hive. I mean, you put it on the side. Let me put it on. It would sit just like this. The bees will crawl down inside these cups. They crawl down inside them because this thing is full of sugar syrup. They will crawl down inside until they got down to the level of the syrup. They could drink all the syrup they wanted. I use those sometimes. The ones I really like are the Miller feeders. They're a lot easier to use. To fill this thing up, you've got to open your hive and then, with your bucket of syrup, pour it down through the little plastic cup and fill that thing up. This thing just sits right on top of your hive like this. When you go to fill it up, you're not really opening the hive because the bees can't get out through the screen. So you can just take the top off of your hive, pour your syrup in there, cover it back up, but you're not fighting with bees the whole time, because you got to remember you're doing this in the middle of the summer. There's thousands of bees flying all around. They smell that syrup you got in your bucket And so you're fighting with the bees the whole time you're filling these things up. With this, it's not near as many bees. Because normally if you open this hive in the middle of summer, you got to imagine that there's thousands and thousands of bees just boiling right out of the top of it. It's fairly easy to get it open. When you go to cover it back up, you're going to smash a bunch of bees because they just won't get out of the way. This thing, Miller feeders are a lot better. The supply houses or most of the kits that, like in southern states, will come with a hive entrance feeder. It's just a block of wood that slips right in here, and you can put an upside down mason jar in it. Those things are terrible. Don't use them. All they do is they attract bees from every hive in the neighborhood because they can all smell that sugar water and they all want to get to it, and it'll start a bunch of fighting right there at the entrance because they're after that sugar water. This is a lot better setup.
So when you put the lid back on the top again, do they, like, they still have access to all that, right? And then,
well, that's the whole reason for that piece of screen right there. It doesn't come this way. I had to put that screen on there, but I put it on there just so bees can't come in through here, because if that's open, you're going to open it up to refill it, and you're going to find about 500 dead bees in here because they all got in there and drowned in that sugar syrup. So I block up the entrance with a piece of hardware cloth. This is number 8 hardware cloth. It's useful for a lot of things, but I put that on there just so bees can't get through that notch, and that way I don't open it up and find a bunch of drowned bees.
So you pour it in and it just goes down into the hive?
No, I would pour it in until it gets up to the level of see, it's got that wood partition down underneath the screen. I would pour it in until it gets to where it's almost running over the top of that thing. So the bees can come up through here out of the hive. They'll crawl right over the top of that little partition and drink up the syrup.
So how many gallons?
This holds around 2 gallons. And in the middle of summer, you'll be feeding probably 2 gallons per hive about twice a week.
Wow.
So you're going through a lot of sugar syrup.
Well, you guys aren't here.
You get 5-gallon buckets for this stuff. You can also use the buckets for putting your honey in next year when you get honey. You can buy buckets online. Sometimes you can get them from the grocery stores, because the grocery stores, all of their frosting and like their cornmeal mixes and all that stuff, it all comes in 5-gallon buckets. It's all food grade buckets. The only hard part is cleaning the stuff out of them, because it takes a lot of elbow grease to clean all of that lard that they use in their frosting out of the buckets. I don't know, I probably wash them 3 or 4 times probably to get it all scrubbed out. But they're free buckets if you can get them.
Does it need to be food grade? Because they sell those like at Lowe's. You wouldn't use one of those?
You can probably get food grade buckets at Lowe's.
Well, I don't know if they're food grade.
Make sure that they're food grade though. They'll have let me get one of them.
so like just the regular blue Lowe's bucket, probably, like, no.
Yeah, probably.
This is a regular Lowe's bucket. You can see no PPA, and it's food grade.
Oh, okay.
So yes, you can get them at Lowe's. And
Okay, so that's
there's one nice thing about the buckets you get at Lowe's. They got a pour spout in the lid. You got to buy the lid separate, but you can get one with the pour spout. It makes it a lot easier to fill up those Miller feeders with the pour spout. And it keeps more bees out of the bucket because it's just the little opening here. That's all you got to open when you're filling up your hives.
So what's your sugar to water ratio?
I always use 2 to 1.
Okay.
It's 2 parts sugar to 1 part water. It's a lot harder to mix up, but you're giving the bees a lot more syrup, a lot more sugar with a smaller amount of syrup. So it's that much less time that you spend feeding your hives, because you're actually probably feeding only for 3 or 4 weeks, and then you'll stop for a while, and then you might have to feed for a couple more weeks. It's kind of tricky, because you got to make sure if you feed them too much, they'll fill the whole hive full of syrup. The queen doesn't have any place to lay the eggs. So it's kind of a balancing act. Feed them enough syrup so where they don't starve, but still giving the queen plenty of room to lay her eggs. You can get an idea, just a rough idea, by just walking up to the back of the hive and picking it up. If it feels like it's about as heavy as a loaf of bread, you really need to feed. If it feels like you're trying to pick up a sack of concrete, you need to stop feeding. And then if you really want to get a good idea, you got to actually go in the hive and look at it, because you want most of the top box to be full of syrup. Most of the bottom box should be full of brood. If your whole top box is full of syrup and you go in the bottom and half of the frames in the bottom are full of syrup too, don't feed anymore. You're getting way too much. They're going to get honey bound.
Could you just add more supers then if you wanted to keep feeding them and keep getting more honey? Could you just add more boxes?
Well, what you get from the sugar syrup isn't honey. It's what they would call funny honey. It's not honey, and it doesn't have any real flavor to it. It just tastes like water with sugar in it. It's not going to taste like honey. Nobody's going to. I have had hives where I would keep feeding them, because they basically will convert the syrup into wax if they're actually drawing wax. Let me see if I can find it. That's where this wax comes from, is the bees eating the syrup and making the wax and drawing out the cells. I did have one hive that was really good at making wax and wanted to make, because they only do it at certain times of the year, mostly. But I had one hive that as long as I kept feeding them, they would keep making wax for my supers. Because the first year that you put supers on, they're just going to be foundation, whatever kind of foundation you're using. The bees have got to draw out all that comb on all of those supers, so you probably won't get much honey the first year. That's why the drawn comb is worth its weight in gold, because that means that you'll get a lot more honey if you've already got all those frames drawn out. If the bees have to draw out those frames, they're going to eat most of the honey to do that. So you don't get much, you don't get to harvest much honey for that. But like I said, I had one hive that wanted to draw out the wax, and so I kept feeding them syrup just so they would draw out the wax. But I didn't let them put any honey, any syrup in that wax. If they do start putting syrup in there, all you have to do is set those frames out in the open. The other bees will find it and they'll rob all that honey, that syrup right out of it. But it's something you want to avoid. And it was just the situation that presented itself. I wouldn't normally recommend anybody try and do that, because it was just something that happened. I mean, it was just luck that it happened that way.
So when you're about to go into the hive, like, what equipment do you bring with you? Like, what do you wear?
Depends on the time of the year. During the spring, if there's a good honey flow, I can get away with nothing but a veil. Getting stung in the face really sucks. Always wear your veil no matter what. If you're just going down just to pop the lid open and take a quick look at it, wear your veil. I can't emphasize that enough. Getting stung in the face sucks. Your eyes get all swollen up. You can't see. Everything's all all weepy and it itches and I have, you know, everybody gets lazy and everybody says, oh, I'm just going down there to put a little syrup on. I'm not going to worry about a veil. Wear a veil. But anyway, if there's a good honey flow, you can get by with just a veil. The bees are so busy collecting nectar, they don't care what you're doing in that hive. All they care about is getting in the hive, dumping their load, and going back to pick up some more. If there is a dearth, all of those forager bees are hanging out in the hive bored and hungry and hot and bored and irritated and hot, and they really care about what you're doing. You better be wearing a full suit because they're going to find a way in and they're going to express their irritation in ways that are not pleasant. You'll have them crawling up your legs. That's really annoying. A lot of people like to wear straps, bike straps work real good for that, to strap their pants legs so the bees can't get up. I've seen people that'll take and they'll tuck the bottom of their pants into their socks. My ex used to like to just wear shorts and a t-shirt, no matter what. If you're okay with getting stung, that's okay. Because you will get stung. If you have an allergy to bee stings, you shouldn't be a beekeeper. Because you're going to get stung. I personally have a real hard time working in gloves. I'll wear gloves if I know I'm going to need them. You know, if I'm tearing hives apart to clean them out or something like that, I know there's going to be a lot of bees stirred up and they're not going to be happy about it. I'll wear gloves then. But usually if I have a choice, I try not to wear gloves. And I'll just get stung 5 or 6 times on the hands. From what Geneva says, I probably won't ever have to worry about arthritis in my hands. Oh, one other thing, I didn't really talk about this before. This is a robbing screen. It goes on the front of the hive like so. I staple on, but it comes with thumbtacks. You can tack it on, whatever you want to do. And they've got different styles of them. Some of them are just a piece of, like a wood frame with a piece of hardware cloth across it. The idea is, when you got a bunch of robbing going on, the robbers are basically going straight into the hive. They'll keep trying, with this screen on, you see it's perforated. They'll keep trying to go straight into the hive. They can smell the honey right through the screen. They're going to try and go straight into the hive. The bees inside the hive will figure out where the opening is up here on the top, and so they'll naturally go down through the opening instead of trying to go straight into the hive. It gives, on a weak hive, it gives the bees inside a way to defend their hive, because what happens is you'll have, oh, I don't know, 4 or 5 guard bees working at the entrance, and 30 or 40 robber bees try to get in there. The first 2 or 3 get caught, the rest go right on in because the guard bees are all tied up with trying to drag away those first 4 or 5 bees that tried to get in. And they wind up, the hive will get emptied out completely in just a couple of hours once the robbing gets started. Most people will put robbing screens on all their hives pretty much as soon as the dirt gets started. And then I'll leave them on there most of the summer. And then for the winter, they make mouse guards. You can go to Bailey's and buy mouse guards. 1/2-inch hardware cloth works great. The mice can't get through that hardware cloth. It's a lot cheaper than going to Bailey's and spending $15 or $20 on a steel mouse guard, which is the ones that Bailey sells are probably nothing but a flat piece of steel with 3/8 or 1/2-inch holes in it. The 1/2-inch hardware cloth works just as good. Just take a stapler and staple it right to the front of the hive. I would show you some, but it's on my hive down there right now. We can go down there and take a look at the hives if y'all want to too.
Yeah.
We'll stay outside the fence just so. Any questions about anything?
So are they happy now with your tulip poplar in bloom?
They don't work the tulip poplar much.
Really? Okay.
That's not tulip poplar. It's saucer magnolia.
Oh, okay.
But they don't. It's too early for the tulip poplar. Once the tulip poplar starts blooming, they'll be working that like crazy. But it's a little early for that yet. But actually, I find for a couple of years I sent off samples. You used to be able to send them to Texas A&M, a lab there, and they would analyze the pollen in them and tell you what the source of the honey was. But the professor that ran the lab died about 18 months ago. So they haven't got the lab going right now. I don't know if they'll get it back up and going or not. And there's another company in Germany I could send samples to, but international shipping's a little more than, because it was already about $100 a sample. So I probably won't keep doing it.
So when beekeepers label their honey as to being sourwood or tupelo or whatever, it's just because they know what was blooming and when the bees
If they're
were active?
certified by the State Beekeepers Association, they have to be able to prove that it is more than 50% sourwood or orange blossom or whatever they're calling it. There's not really any regulation. The FDA or none of them actually regulate that. There's almost no there's really no regulation that says it has to be honey.
Which is why a lot of them just sell cheap sugar water, right?
It could be. The only real way you know that you're getting honey is if you're buying honeycomb. Because you can bet that it'd be way more trouble than it's worth for somebody to try and make that comb and put corn syrup or whatever in it.
If it's more viscous, is that an indication?
Probably not. It's pretty easy to fake. I honestly wouldn't trust most of what you get at the grocery stores to be honey. A lot of it's illegal for Chinese honey to get imported into the U.S. Not because it's fake honey, which it probably is, but because it has real high levels of antibiotics that they feed to their bees. But there's a lot of honey is supposedly the second most adulterated food crop. Virgin olive oil, extra virgin olive oil, or I guess olive oil is the most. I mean, it's just estimates, but that's what the experts estimate that honey is number 2 and olive oil is number 1, just because they're so expensive.
So what, like, plants do you have that you know that like the bees really like native plants that you grow around here?
The ones that I got sidetracked where I was talking about that. But when I had my honey tested, the biggest source that I had for my honey, which was always like 30-something%, was sumac, poison ivy, poison ivy, poison oak, poison sumac was the biggest nectar sources for mine. I would usually get, it would be like 30-something% on the sumac. For some reason I get a lot of willow. I think it's because down at the bottom of the street it gets real marshy down there, so there's probably some pretty good willow groves down there. I know I've got a few right there on the back edge of my property, but I would always get a lot of willow. I would get almost no tulip poplar at all. It would always be one of the 0.5% range things. There'd be a bunch. There'd be like a couple of 30s, 1 or 2 10s, and then a whole bunch of them that would be like 1% or less. So that's why I call it wildflower honey, because it's got literally several hundred different sources in that honey.
So some people talk about eating honey to build up resistance to allergies because of local pollen. Would that, and I don't know if you go along with that or not, but when you say sumac, I'm super sensitive to poison ivy. It wouldn't help me build up any resistance?
I sell my honey. A lot of people buy it to control their allergies. And when they ask me, will this help my allergies? I always tell them I'm not a doctor. If they want medical advice, they should talk to their doctor.
Yeah.
But personally, my opinion, most people are sensitive to windblown pollen, pine, a lot of grass pollens and stuff like that. Bees don't feed on windblown pollen. It's windblown because they're wind pollinated plants. Bees feed on insect pollinated plants, which most people are not allergic to because they don't produce any pollen in the air.
Yeah.
So, because they're not windblown. Yeah. See, you see, the logic is there. So, to me, I don't see how that logic holds up, just because the pollens that people are going to be allergic to are not going to be in the honey. I mean, some of it might have blown in there. There might be some pine pollen in there just because it blew in the front of the hive. But for the most part, you're not going to find any of the windblown pollens in honey. There is a lot of pollen in there, but it's just not windblown pollen. It's from insect pollinated plants.
Mm-hmm.
Just wondering, is this the honey house?
Yeah. Y'all want to take a look at it?
Yes.
I was looking into. That's pretty impressive.
This is stuff that y'all probably aren't going to ever be interested in buying. I do it mostly because I like the toys. This is an extractor. It's pretty obvious how this works. I should have brought a frame in here. Basically, you set the frames down in here this way. You put this one holds 8 frames. When you turn it on, it's just going to spin and spin, and it spins all that honey right out of the frames because you've already opened up the top of the frames, uncapped the frames. You put a bucket underneath here, open this up, and the honey just runs right out the bottom and into the bucket.
If you don't have that machine, how can you like extract the honey otherwise? Is there any other way?
I'm pretty sure David Bailey has an extractor that he rents out. If you join Orange County Beekeepers, which I believe that's a $10 a year fee, which is pretty cheap. Yeah. You can rent an extractor for them for, I think, maybe $5 a day, and you would normally rent it for just like a day or two, and that'd be all you need it for. So, you know, for $25 or $30, you can rent an extractor. Or you could buy an extractor. They sell like 2-frame extractors for, less than $100. They're nothing but a plastic bucket with a rack down inside of them and a hand crank. It's a hard way to extract your honey, but it works. Okay. It's just a lot of elbow power.
One year we had honey and we used a mesh cloth. So a mesh cloth. So if like you're on a budget, like you can still extract it without having an extractor.
You just let it like drip out like through the cloth?
Oh, we first like cut the like caps off the frames, and then like we would like cut it in pieces and like put it in the mesh cloth and basically just like squeeze all the honey out.
But you sacrifice all your wax.
So there is a like drawback. So definitely, if you could afford a honey extractor, yes, go and get one. But if not, like, and you're okay with not having any wax as a result, like that's another way you could possibly do it for cheap.
But you're going to pay for it on the back end when you do. Because it's that much less honey you're going to get next year.
It is.
Like renting it for like $10 to join, $5 to rent it, $15.
I think the rental's a better option because it's really not very much money, and you also get the benefit of the meetings every month because they have some really good speakers. If you're really curious about beekeeping, you'll find out about, especially now that they're doing more meetings on Zoom. You can have speakers like who was the most recent one? Well, you get all of the entomologists from all the different universities all over the country, or all over the world really, doing monthly meetings that normally you would be listening to some beekeeper that's talking about making, using nukes in the summer or whatever, and instead of that you're listening to a world-renowned researcher that's talking about the latest with bee genetics and genetic research and and new hive diseases. And this is,
So is
y'all won't ever mess with one of these probably.
Is someone in the club part of the Orange County Beekeeping?
Oh yeah, multiple of our exec members are all part of OCBA.
Okay.
And
I am.
yeah.
Well, yeah. Plus you're getting the students.
But our club was a lot smaller back then. Like we had 12 people.
This is an uncapping tank. You can make your own really easy out of plastic storage boxes from Lowe's. If you get some that are the right size. This is exactly the right size to be able to hang the frames crossways. So I would, if I was smart, I would set it up ahead of time and it would all be ready. This section here, this is a frame, okay? I would take it like this. I would set the edge of it on that nail right there, and I would take my scratcher and scratch one side, flip it over, scratch the other side, and then hang it right here across. And if it drips down into the bottom, that's great. It's that much less I've got to extract. I'll put another bucket right here. And it just, the bottom of this thing is sloped, so it just runs right out the gate. It lets me go ahead and extract 30 or 40 frames, because that thing's kind of slow. It takes about half an hour for it to spin all the honey out of the frames. I wish I had a 20 frame extractor. I don't have $1,000, so. But anyway, it lets me go ahead and get 3 or 4 loads done and ready. And then I can just set them into that once all the frames that are in there are empty. I just take them all out, put them back in a super, and then eventually they'll go back on the hive and the bees will clean out whatever the extractor didn't get. They call them wet frames. The bees they don't miss nothing. They'll have them just completely dried out, but by the time they get done with them. But you can make exactly the same thing by just getting a couple of plastic tote boxes from Lowe's. You drill a bunch of holes in the bottom of one of them, stack it inside of another one, so that the honey's got a way to drain out the bottom, drain through the bottom.
And as I recall, you were saying you try to maximize honey production, so you don't leave a lot of honey for the bees to overwinter with?
That's me. If you didn't care about the honey and you were just like giving it away to your friends or whatever and you weren't selling any of it, I would say leave the honey on the hive most of the summer and just extract whatever's left in, say, September, August or September, and that'll get the bees through the summer. It's probably not going to be enough to get them through the whole year. And once you take the honey off in August, say, you would have to probably feed for several weeks, because you want them to go into winter with 60 or 80 pounds of honey. Say a total weight on the hive of a little over 100, anything over 100 pounds for the total weight of that, with the woodwork and everything. So that would be about 60 or 70 pounds of honey. And you probably won't have that much left at the end of the summer. If you just let them keep all of the honey all summer long, they're going to eat up most of it by August. And so you'll have to feed then.
This is also something that we talked about in like the last class, which is posted on YouTube. So like if you want to hear a bit more in detail, like it's a more in-depth conversation about like how much honey you should leave in your hive, etc.
I don't think it really hurts the bees though that you just feed them sugar water. There's, I'm sure, a lack of micronutrients in the sugar water that would make the bees healthier. But there's also lots of additives that you can add to your sugar water if you're so inclined. I haven't seen, there's some people doing research on it, but there's not a lot of people doing research on it. So most of it is just marketing hype. You hear how this is going to make your bees nice and healthy, but they don't really back that up with any kind of research. They just say it's been proven, but they don't say who proved it. Did they improve? They got 2 hives out in the back that they were feeding, and both of those hives lived all the way through the summer, so it must be healthy. That's not really proof, but you don't know what their proof is. But it's not saying that the stuff is bad. A lot of people like to mix lemongrass oil with their sugar syrup. It's just sort of a fad, I guess you would say. It's real popular though. There's a lot of people doing it. It smells like citrus. And it's got a good smell to it, so it must be healthy. And honestly, that's the way most of it goes. People tell you, oh yeah, this stuff is great, but they haven't really researched anything. To them it smelled nice, so it must be great. And so there's a lot of people that will tell you how great lemongrass oil or Honey Bee Healthy, that's the main ingredient in Honey Bee Healthy is lemongrass oil. You see a lot of recipes on YouTube for how to make your own Honey Bee Healthy, and it's mostly lemongrass oil. And I'm not saying it's bad. It might make the bees feed on it a little more. Who knows? But honestly, I've never had any real problems from feeding my bees sugar water in the summer. I can tell you it's a lot healthier than just letting them starve to death.
Oh, and in the winter you feed them too, right? And so
in the winter.
But with warmer winters, are they more active, so they require more?
Yeah, it's a real problem. That we're not getting real cold winters. They're going to be a lot more active, and they're going to go through all of their stored up syrup by first part of January. In the winters, I take and put on. Let me see if I can find one. You can go to Bailey's and buy candy boards. I use sugar boards, which are almost the same thing. I just need to find one. They're all still on my hives right now. I'm trying to find a spare one.
What's he saying about creamed honey in the last class?
Oh yeah, that it's just like a different type of honey product you can make. He said it's like the consistency of an icy, which I thought was really interesting because I want to try it. So
Is he selling any honey right now? Do you know?
he said last year honey production wasn't as great. So he's not selling any currently. But I know he was him and Geneva were gonna bring honey to our next class. So maybe. If you want free samples.
This is what's left of a candy board after the bees have eaten all the candy out of it. If you went to Bailey's and bought one, it would be just a solid block of candy in here. It's made just like you would, like a hard candy or whatever. You take sugar water and cook it.
Right.
And you pour it into the wood mold, and it'll get hard. And then he leaves a hole in the middle just for ventilation. You put a can of, I use Vienna sausages, but beans or anything round works great. For me, I put a piece of 1/2-inch hardware cloth across the bottom of this, cover the inside of it with a little bit of wax paper, and then fill it full of wet sugar. You don't have to cook it. Cooking candy is, to me, a lot of trouble. I don't know. To me, it's hot. I don't like getting burned. Yeah, and that's the way you do it. You can go on YouTube and find instructions for making your own candy boards if you really want to. You can go to Bailey's and buy them for about $40. That's what I usually recommend to people that have 2 hives. Go to Bailey's and buy a candy board. It's easier. But if you want to make a sugar board, you would mix, it's 1.5 tablespoons to 10 pounds of sugar. You're just getting it a little bit damp is all you're doing. And then you pack it in here on top of the hardware cloth and the wax paper. and let it sit for 3 or 4 days, and it gets crispy. It's not really hard. I mean, you can take it and crush it in your hand, but it gets hard enough to where it'll hold its shape. You take the can of whatever you use to make that hole in the middle, take that out, put it on your hive, and that's their winter food.
Cool.
They'll eat right through the wax paper. If you go down and look at my hives, you can see white underneath all the hives where they've eaten away all that wax paper, and it's just little slivers of wax paper underneath all the hives.
So to close us out, can we take a quick look at like your hives from like the fence? Here.
What they're doing right now is called orientation flights. You can see the same thing going on at all the hives down the line. What they're doing is they're flying out in front of the hive. Those are all new foragers. They go out and they fly around in front of the hive, and they'll kind of just do a dance in the front of the hive. They're memorizing what their hive looks like. They're looking at it from the front, they're looking at it from both sides. And if you watch, you'll see that there's a fair number of bees that are just going back and forth. Those are the foragers that are actually bringing in the pollen and the nectar.
Is that a camera you have on your bees?
Yeah, I don't use it anymore. I've got a website, and I was doing a live feed for the bees. It's aggravating to keep it running 24/7 because the YouTube kept dropping the connection, and I would have to like reboot the camera every 2 or 3 days and stuff. I finally just quit doing it because it's just more trouble than it's worth. But it was kind of cool to be able to just go on the website and sit there and watch the bees going in and out.
Also, what is honey bound? What does that mean?
It means that the whole hive is full of nectar,
Oh.
and because each one of those little cells in the honeycomb is either used for an egg if it's empty, or it would be full of pollen or nectar, or a combination of the two. They take the pollen and they actually mix it with some nectar and make what they call bee bread, and that's what the bees actually eat is the softened up pollen. But if they fill all of the cells full of nectar, then the queen doesn't have any room to lay eggs, and so your hive is going to die, because bees only live for about 7 weeks. From the time the egg is laid until the time the old bee dies is about 7 weeks. So it doesn't take very long. If the queen can't lay any eggs, it doesn't take very long before you don't have any bees left in there. But she's the only one that lives, well, the queen and the drones. The drones will live all summer if they don't mate, and then at the end of the summer, the workers are going to kick all the drones out because they don't need them in the wintertime. They're not going to do any mating in the wintertime. They don't want them around because they have to keep feeding them. And so they're not going to keep feeding somebody doesn't benefit the hive.
Does anybody else have any questions? Well, thank you so much for having us and showing us all the ins and outs of the hive. And also the hive equipment. Our next meeting is going to be Thursday at 11 o'clock. It's in Union Room 3409. So if you would like to come in person, there are spots available, there are seats available. And then if you would like to live stream it, it's also live streamed and then recorded and posted on YouTube. So this will be our first out of 2 field days. So our second field day will be in March, and more information will be sent out about that as we get closer.
And if you come into the second one, you will need your bee suit, veil, whatever you're comfortable with.
Yeah.
If you're comfortable with whatever you're wearing, I'm comfortable with whatever you're wearing.
In terms of like beekeeping club, or if you're a student, please wear like long pants, long sleeves, and then we can we have veils and gloves. that we can like provide as well. So like if you have your own veil, if you have your own gloves, like please bring them, because like we have a finite amount. We're trying to buy some more, but like if you do not, like we can also provide some.
But you got to remember that if you're using the stuff that she's lending out, somebody else has already sweated in that ahead of you.
We disinfect. We put like Lysol.
Pre-COVID, they wore them.
All right, like we Lysol them and disinfect them afterwards. But like if you need them, like we have them. We have a bunch stored up. So yeah, thank you guys for coming. We really appreciate it.
But you